The newest ground hero battle unit is Gharnef, and thanks to some great artwork, he really nails that "I'm the bad guy who uses evil magic" look down pat. As is tradition, evil dark magic users are represented as red mages, and Gharnef is another free infantry red mage. His 5-star stats include 38 HP, 30 attack, 34 speed, 27 defense, and 23 resistance. 30 attack and 34 speed isn't super special, but it's a decent offensive stat line for a mage. 38 HP is about average, 27 defense is actually quite high among all red mages, but unfortunately 23 res is leaning toward the bottom of the pack. Essentially, Gharnef will lean more toward the offensive mage side of things just from stats alone, but besides his decent speed, he will be pretty balanced for all his other stats. Gharnef's unique tome is called Imhullu, and it grants a flat +3 res, bringing Gharnef up to 26 resistance. Its second effect is that at the start of turn 3, deal 5 damage to non-magic foes, aka non-mage units, within 5 columns centered on Gharnef himself. Also, it inflicts a status that prevents foes' counterattacks through their next actions. So, 5 columns centered on Gharnef means 2 columns to his left, 2 columns to his right, and of course the last column is directly in line with himself. That is very wide, at least for regular sized maps, and if Gharnef is anywhere near the middle of the map, he should hit almost everyone with Imhullu's effect. Second thing to note is that it will only affect non-magic users, and magic users refers to tomes specifically. If the enemy is within those 5 columns at the start of turn 3 and they aren't a mage, then they take a game-breaking, massive 5 damage. I'm of course being sarcastic, and to be honest, I don't think 5 damage is very impressive. That will not knock any unit out of quick riposte range or even into brazen range. I would say it's almost laughable. For the second effect, Imhullu also inflicts what I guess can be called the dazzling status onto enemies. That means the unit cannot counterattack back, similar to if the unit was using a fire sweep weapon or wind sweep. With all the insanely powerful enemy phase units and builds out there, this can be quite useful. However, that condition of only being on turn 3, lining up the enemy in that 5 column area, and then making sure they aren't a mage is quite the workaround. I think this effect can be useful, but knowing it only works on turn 3 means Imhullu is basically a plain old tome that just grants +3 res. Maybe Gharnef's other base skills will help synergize with his weapon and stats. His special is Ignis, and that almost seems like an out of season April Fool's joke. 27 defense is not amazing, and personally I don't think it's even worth it to run Bonfire or Ignis unless a unit reaches at least 30 defense. I could maybe see it being on his base kit if Imhullu gave +3 defense, but it gives extra resistance, which is useless for Ignis. 4 cooldown is also pretty high, and Gharnef won't be charging it very fast even if he doubles his enemy. Garnet's A skill is Mirror Stance, which grants +4 attack and resistance when attacked. At least when used with Imhullu, Gharnef would end up with 48 attack and 30 resistance when attacked. It's not bad, but I wouldn't say Gharnef is a great tanking mage in general anyway. Like I said earlier, his stats lean more toward the offensive side of things slightly, and generally you don't want your offensive units to be taking many hits. As for Garnet's B skill, he comes with Chill Attack, and that is generally a useful skill for any unit. Being able to cripple the strongest enemy can be useful, and technically if Gharnef wanted to tank a hit with Mirror Stance, maybe Chill Attack helps him out there. In general, I just feel like Gharnef is all over the place as a unit, average stats except for speed, a tome that is very hit or miss, and his base set of skills doesn't really synergize amazingly with his stats or his weapon. I feel like Mirror Stance and Chill Attack would make it seem like Gharnef wants to tank magical attacks, but with a base 23 res, that's not the greatest starting point. Imhullu's ability to nullify enemy counterattacks also makes it seem like Gharnef should be attacking hard to take down enemies and try to be an offensive threat. To me, Gharnef doesn't really have a crystal clear role for the team with his base kit, and it's probably best to think about making some changes. Now, I want to discuss the viability of weapons with one-time use effects, and are they really worth using? The first weapon we got with this type of effect was Fallen Takumi's Scotty Bow. On turn 3, he deals 10 damage to all units within 3 columns, centered on Takumi, plus he applies the panic status to anyone hit. Garen's Breath of Blight activates on turn 4 and deals 10 damage to anyone within 3 spaces. He also heals based on the number of enemies that he hits. Most recent is of course Garnet's Imhullu. So first off, the main critique of these weapons, is that they are basically just glorified silver weapons most of the time. Essentially, they are meant to be boss type weapons, and since these guys are Grand Hero battle units, that's pretty much how they work when you have to challenge their maps. You have to worry about reinforcements and get hit by their effects from long range. For the most part, the one turn activation does make these weapons very niche, because if you miss that window of power, then the weapon doesn't offer much compared to other weapons that have effects that are always in effect during battle. With the recent addition of Aether Raids, I do think these weapons got a bit more viability. Since players are basically creating their own Grand Hero battles, it's great to have boss type units that are hard to take down or are very annoying to take down. The other important aspect of the mode is that there is a turn limit, and turn 3 to 4 is really important for most fights. Turn 1 is almost always used for setup, and based on the team used, turn 2 and 3 might also have the attacker moving around trying to get into position. If you have your Fallen Takumi or Garen sitting at the end of the map, you force the attacker to either take them out before their weapons activate, take the brunt of the weapon effects, or they have to wait another turn just to avoid those effects. Honestly, I think trying to stall the attacker is a great defense strategy because you force them to make moves. In Grand Hero battle maps, we can just take our time and retreat, although generally that's why reinforcements exist on those maps. If your defense team can force the attacker to make one bad move, that might be enough for you to pull out a victory or at least take down a couple of their units. I suppose another thing to discuss for these one-turn weapons is that you can stack the effects just by bringing multiple copies of the unit. To be honest, it can be very cool to cheese the enemy with 40 damage with 4 Fallen Takumis, but then you're stuck with 4 colorless archers. I don't think it's a great team to use, but again, they might be useful for Aether Raid defense teams. The upper tiers of Aether Raids even allows 5 and 6 defense units, so you could really make some crazy setups. Garnet's Imhullu only deals 5 damage, but start multiplying that a bit and maybe add in a Fallen Takumi with Scotty to the mix and you could have a legitimate strategy. Maybe. Again, I think it's probably super cheesy and I don't really expect many people to invest in the same unit by 5-starring them that many times. I mean, who knows, maybe 6 Fallen Takumis could be a legitimate strategy for Aether Raids, although I hardly see that happening. Moving past that discussion, how does Gharnef fare against the 4 other free reward red infantry mages? We have Canis, Julius, Leon, and Arvis. As I mentioned earlier, it seems like Garnet's base kit wants him to tank magical attacks and with his res +3 from Imhullu, Mirror Stance, and Chill Attack. However, as you can see, our other red mages here have a ton more starting res than Gharnef. Gharnef probably doesn't want to build defensively, and if you want a tanky red mage, then Leon or Julius fills those spots. Gharnef is the fastest in the group, but everyone else has higher attack, which means Gharnef has to double to make his speed stat relevant. The closest in terms of offensive prowess is probably Arvis, but keep in mind Arvis has an entire niche for himself, being that he can use all 4 stat ploys if he wants. His res is also good enough to make it work, and Arvis can give himself and the team some nice advantages by debuffing his opponents. I would say that Garnef's best bet to differentiate himself is to play an offensive role. Usually for builds, most units can make do with most of their base kit, but for Gharnef, I do think it's worth changing out Ignis for Moonbow or Luna, and then Mirror Stance with Fury 3. This build is very simple, and we're just trying to give Gharnef some flat stat boost, especially in the speed department. With Fury 3 and Speed +3 Sacred Seal, Gharnef reaches 40 speed, which is great. Imhullu's weak 5 damage can be helped by Savage Blow, and if Gharnef can attack during turn 3, then he can hopefully avoid counters to safely apply Savage Blow's additional chip damage. As for Chill Attack, it's a great team support skill and it can be nice just to have. I'm not going to suggest a Blade Tome build because pretty much anyone can make it work, so let's try a build made just for defense teams since we talked about that a lot. This build wants to be annoying for the enemy by keeping Gharnef safe using Water Sweep. If he can outspeed enemy mages, healers, or dragons, then Gharnef gets free hits in and this time can apply attack smoke as well. The key is just staying alive and being annoying. If the attacker tries to bait Gharnef during turn 3, then he gets Imhullu's bonus of blocking all counterattacks from non-mages, which is great. The idea of this build is that we are just trying to keep the AI from suiciding Gharnef into an enemy phase unit, or at least making them wait out Imhullu's turn 3 dazzling effect. So, should you 5-star Gharnef? Well, in terms of stats, his speed is good and his best attribute. It can be used as a great starting point for however you want to build him. As for everything else, well, they are all about average. Definitely not terribly low, but Gharnef doesn't have a set role as either an attacker or a defender. Imhullu, in my opinion, is kind of underwhelming. The 5-column range is fantastic, but only dealing 5 damage is not exactly game changing. I think it needs to be used with the dazzling status in mind, and that requires you to have a clear plan of attack on turn 3. You don't even need Gharnef to do the attacking, it can be someone else. As a reminder, Imhullu does not infect mages, so be aware of that. Overall, I don't really feel like Gharnef has a clear standout role for a team. He has a ton of competition if you want a red infantry mage, and we've had a ton of free ones too. His base kit and Imhullu don't really have a ton of synergy together. They both can work fine, but I do think Gharnef requires some skill inheritance. I've stated that I think Gharnef does slightly lean more toward being an offensive mage, but in reality, he gets outgunned by Aversa, who we just got, as well as regular Tharja, who's been in the game since launch. If you're looking for a Bladetongue red mage, well, I wouldn't place Gharnef as priority number 1. The one positive thing about Gharnef that I think most people can agree on is at least he looks amazing aesthetically. His art is good and his animations are great too. Can't really complain about either of those. His voice lines are also pretty good. His voice actor really gets into the role. If you want some flair for your units, then Gharnef does not lack in that department at all. That's about it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed, and let me know in the comments about how you feel about Gharnef as a unit. Of course, always pick up all the copies if you can, and if you really don't care for Gharnef himself, then you can use him as skill fodder for mirror stance or chill attack. Thanks for watching, I'll see you in the next video.